Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, we have one of the most iconic beat-em-ups of all time, an obscure fighter on the Sega Genesis, and one more thing. Hi, I'm your host, Jared, and today is August 19th, 1992. One of the most beloved Super Nintendo games of all time needs little introduction. Released August 15th, 1992, was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4: Turtles in Time.
This is Cowabunga. And this is Cowabunga.
But the turtles for your 16-bit system are Cowabunga! Holy cow, it's Turtles in Time! The cool arcade game for Super NES, now with tasty turtle duels. And psych up your Sega Genesis with the Hyper Stone Heist and all new 3D TurboGrafx. So remember,
This is Cowabunga.
but the turtles for Super NES and Sega Genesis are...
Cowabunga, dude.
Turtles in Time is a beat-em-up for Super Nintendo featuring two-player co-op as the eponymous Ninja Turtles, battling all manner of foot soldiers and time-traveling to different eras, with each end of the level having an iconic Ninja Turtles villain to defeat. There is a bigger variety of attacks compared to usual beat-em-ups, allowing for multiple kinds of jumping attacks, running, sliding, shoulder tackling, and more. What many people surprisingly didn't know is that this is a port of the second Ninja Turtles arcade game, also called Turtles in Time. Some things had to be lost in the transition, such as some frames of animation being removed, less voice lines, and of course the SNES version does not have the 4-player mode. However, what the Super Nintendo version gained far outweighs the losses. There's now a time trial and versus mode added. The final boss of the prehistoric era was changed from Cement Man to Slash. The Rat King boss was added to the end of Sewer Surfin'. Bebop and Rocksteady were the new bosses at the end of the pirate ship, and an all-new Technodrome level was added. Toka and Razor from the second Ninja Turtles movie were moved to be the bosses in that Technodrome level. The final boss was changed from Shredder with a laser sword to Super Shredder, also from the second TMNT movie, and changes were made to take advantage of the SNES's Mode 7 graphics. Neon Knight Riders is now a behind-the-back perspective, and an all-new Shredder boss was added to the end of the Technodrome level. It requires players to beat them by throwing enemies at your television screen. And that was one of the biggest things for Turtles in Time. The months leading up to the game had a ludicrous amount of hype for a multitude of reasons. The most obvious one being, they're the Ninja Turtles! The cartoon show was still running strong, toys were everywhere. In 1990, the first movie was released and did well, and in 1991, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: Secret of the Ooze hit theaters and did gangbusters. Also, I don't know if this is just a coincidence or not, but the next movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, comes out in 1993, and in that movie, they just so happen to travel in time. So, more importantly than all of that, everyone in the industry was hyped for the Super Nintendo game. It was shown at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier in the year, and people walked away impressed. It was already being called the best looking, best sounding game of the entire show floor. But what stood out to everyone was the fact that you could throw enemies at the screen. These kinds of graphics just weren't seen before at home. It was typical to see this kind of thing in arcade games like the coin-op Turtles in Time or the super scaling technology used by Sega in their games like Afterburner or Super Hang-On. Seeing this on a console and geniusly using the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 scaling to make it happen was impressive and a technical marvel. And upon release, reviewers loved it. Electronic Gaming Monthly in issue 36 gave it straight 9s out of 10 across the board. Each reviewer complimented the graphics, the sound, the music, and the smoothness of the controls. This is one of the rare instances in which the console port is actually better than the arcade version. Now, despite all of this, Turtles in Time for the SNES is not a bestseller. It doesn't even crack the top 50 best-selling SNES games. It is frequently regarded now as one of the best Super Nintendo games of all time, let alone the best Ninja Turtles game. As the years passed, Turtles in Time would see numerous versions and re-releases. Sega fans know of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist, which would release a couple of months later. That's a separate Sega version of Turtles in Time, which shares a lot with the SNES version, but has its own exclusive levels and bosses. but you can't throw enemies at the screen. In 2009, a full-fledged remake was created in the form of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time Reshelled for the Xbox 360 Marketplace and PlayStation 3 Store. And it was bad. The 3D graphics sucked, the stages became muddied and lifeless, and the entire soundtrack sounded like crap. In 2022, the all-new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge is an original game that pays a lot of homage to Turtles in Time, including throwing enemies into the screen, and one stage beginning with Big Apple 3 p.m. And also coming at the end of this August 2022 is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Collection. It contains a total of 13 different Ninja Turtles games, including the arcade version of Turtles in Time, and, for the first time on a non-Nintendo platform, the SNES version of Turtles in Time. Last month, we had the home release of Street Fighter II, and we're already starting the line of clones. Released this week in 1992 was Fighting Masters for the Sega Genesis. Fighting Masters is a one-on-one fighting game featuring 12 different alien characters duking it out for supremacy. The story is that a supernova is going to eradicate the universe, and some higher power will allow one race to survive. Whoever wins this fighting tournament. Gameplay is simplistic, having you jump around and attack, sometimes grappling and doing some wrestling-style moves. Each character doesn't really have a bunch of special moves, but really more like one trait that makes them slightly different than the others. The main thing is that every time a character is thrown or knocked back, they'll take additional damage every time they hit a wall or bounce off the ground. Honestly, I found this frustrating every time I played it. The wall hit would cause a freeze and be really irritating as it delays me getting to have an action. Combine that with the erratic movement and the only buttons being jump and attack, it's not the greatest game in the world. Fighting Masters was developed by Almanac Corporation. A lot of the same developers of this game would later go on to work for another notable project from Almanac, a game called Evo Search for Eden on the Super Nintendo. The TurboGrafx 16 also saw a new release this week with Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu. In it, you play as Jackie Chan himself when an evil wizard steals his girlfriend or something. It's an action platformer where you run, jump, and attack enemies to get to the end of each stage. While you do have 5 continues to use, you only have 1 life. The art style is very hit or miss. You're either into the weirdly chibi art style of Jackie Chan himself, or you're not at all. And to some of you, this game may look incredibly familiar. That's because it's actually an upgraded port of Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu from the NES, released in early 1991. Now, in the 90s, by this point Jackie Chan was already a massive star in China, but he'd only just begun to make a name for himself in America. So it wasn't exactly a huge tie-in draw to have a movie star's name and likeness attached to a random game.
New Line Cinema presents the action hero who does all his own stunts. Jackie Chan. In the Bronx.
I will give credit to the TurboGrafx 16's box art of the game though. That's a pretty good drawing of Jackie Chan. Reviews of Action Kung Fu weren't great. It was described as passable at best, strange, and one particular reviewer hating the art style, with the bold claim of the chibi, head bigger than body art phase is already long gone. Reviews used to make no sense. The developer who ported this game, Now Production, had mostly worked as an assistant studio, being brought in to help polish other titles and help wherever they were needed. But they did do some major titles of their own. They're likely most known for making the Sega Genesis games Splatterhouse 2 and Splatterhouse 3. There were more games released this week than I can talk about, so take it away, Editor Dylan.
The other games released this week include Capcom's Gold Medal Challenge on the NES. Imagine an Olympics-based Mario Party that doesn't feature Sonic, or Mario, For tutorials of any kind, the Game Gear had RC Grand Prix, an isometric racer that apparently features upgradable cars. I wouldn't know because I couldn't pass a single race. Fighting Masters wasn't the only game released on the Genesis this week. Jennifer Capriati Tennis is a basic tennis game starring a name that I already forgot despite saying it at the beginning of this very sentence. The animations are kinda cute though. Here's a clip. You okay? The last game that released this week is Shadow of the Beast for the Atari Lynx. It has the side-scrolling sections of Zelda 2 and the puzzle logic of King's Quest. For example, you need to punch the cannon the second it's lit to kill the dude to get the gun, to traverse the forest to find a ball to plug a hole to run a gauntlet of pain only to realize I don't know how to turn the lights on. Which means we have a total of 7 games released on these 6 consoles this week in 1992. Shadow of the Beast seems fascinating. I've never heard of it before. Apparently there's an unreleased SNES version floating around. Okay, I need to look more into this. Here's Jared with the Collector's Corner.
Here in the Collector's Corner, being a beloved SNES classic these days, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time's value continues to go up every time I look at it. The cartridge alone is now over $50, and a complete copy will cost you over $300. Fighting Masters shows that obscurity doesn't always translate to value, with it being this week's value dud. The game is only about $15, and with a case and manual, it only goes up to $30. Perhaps due to sheer novelty, Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu is this week's biggest value gainer. The loose game card alone is worth over $100, and with the complete, it's almost $300. And that's it for today. Next week, a food-themed beat-em-up, an obscure arcade game from Capcom, and the first-person shooter ever on the SNES. And it's not the one you're thinking of. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And if you already are, thank you so much for watching this show every single week. How many memories do you have of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time? I play it all the time to this very day. In fact, the best part about doing this show is using it as an excuse to play it again.